The 2023-2024 college football season was one for the books, with shocking headlines almost every week. From Deion Sanders, a.k.a. Coach Prime, taking over Colorado football, to the Michigan sign-stealing scandal, to Florida State being the first team ever to be 13-0 and not make the playoffs, and the cherry on top. Nick Saban announces his retirement after 17 years at Alabama. Welcome back to Penn State Sports Night. I'm Gianna Cutaia alongside Joey David and Jackson Tortone. With these headlines taking over, let's take a dive into the college football playoff. Jackson, let's start with you. The semifinals, Washington Huskies versus Texas at the All-State Sugar Bowl. What did you see in that game? It was a very close game, an exciting game. Washington, as we know, won 37-31. But what did you see happen?
So I can honestly say this game surprised me. I thought that Texas had the deeper team, and I thought they were going to be able to defeat Washington with their defensive advantages. But Michael Penix proved me wrong. This was one of the greatest single QB performances in the college football playoffs probably ever. He threw 430 yards and 2 passing touchdowns, and it seems like he was not missing a single one of his deep passes. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So Quinn Ewers also underperformed. He only completed 56% of his passes. He was throwing the ball just inaccurately. No interceptions, but just not accurate passes, deep ball or otherwise. And honestly, if he had made a back shoulder throw at the end of the game, they would have won the game. There was just mistake after mistake on the Texas offensive side, and that's what cost them the game.
I got to agree, and I got to stay right with Michael Penix here. He showed why he was up there in the Heisman finalists. He just has such great pocket presence. And he's one of the best in the pocket quarterbacks we've seen in the past couple years. Whenever he has a clean pocket to set his feet and throw, he's one of the most accurate quarterbacks, and he's going to show that a lot coming into the draft, and he's going to make whatever team drafts him in the first round very happy. And he was able to do that because he had his 1-2 punch in Rome Odunze as well as Polk. Being that great 1-2 punch at receiver, that they were able to work off him, and they were able to be a good group, I guess would be the word, for the skill positions to help Washington. But when you look over at Texas, I think it might be Arch Manning's time. I really don't. I think Quinn Ewers might have just played him out of a game. We might see him in the transfer portal soon, maybe a training camp battle. But honestly, Texas just did not look like the team that they believed were going to be the 3 seed.
And honestly, it was against one of the weaker passing defenses in the country in Washington, so that made it even more disappointing.
I agree. Michael Penix was definitely dominant throughout that game. But moving on to Michigan versus Alabama in the semifinals at the Rose Bowl. This was a very, very exciting game to watch. I had me on the edge of my seat the entire time watching it. It came all the way down to overtime, and as we know, Michigan moved on to the national championship game and won. But what did you guys take away from the Michigan-Bama game?
First off, you were talking about storylines earlier on. Who would have thought this would be the last game of the Nick Saban era? I think that's just amazing. It just honestly surprising, and it was a great way to almost put the cherry on top of the full NCAA football season. But the real stat line you got to look at is 116 yards, a 48 QBR, and a fumble. That's not good for Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe has dealt with so many question marks. He was always talking about letting all the naysayers know. And the naysayers were able to talk a lot about that game. I don't think Jalen Milroe is the future. I don't think Jalen Milroe played well enough that he has a deserving spot next season. And I honestly don't think Alabama is going to be in a similar situation next year. But with the new regime, there's going to be a lot of roster turnover, and there could be something there because they do have a lot of good pieces still coming in that haven't transferred yet. But looking at Michigan, they played their bread and butter. They won at the line of scrimmage. They played good defense. And once you win against the line of scrimmage against a team like Bama that is so reliant on the run game, that's really going to help you win the game.
Yeah, so both teams made some very uncharacteristic mistakes. You had the Alabama center snapping the ball behind Milroe twice. You had Michigan muffing 2 punts. But I think Michigan made more mistakes, so the final score of the game doesn't really reflect the power of both teams. I think Michigan was clearly the better team. And, people were ripping on McCarthy saying, he gets carried by his running backs, but he performed very well this game. He threw 221 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. He finished with a QBR at around 92. He played a very solid game. And obviously Blake Corum, put in the game-winning touchdown at the end. But I have to give him credit for that. And also to the Michigan defense for sacking Jalen Milroe 6 times. That is no easy feat with how athletic he is. So I think Michigan earned this win. This was not a fluke win. This was a dominant win for the Big Ten against an SEC school. And it really makes a good statement for college football.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Michigan played their game, did exactly what they needed. And it's going to be interesting to see what Bama is going to be in the future with Nick Saban leaving. But let's quickly move on to Georgia. We all know they didn't make the college playoffs. The committee decided not to. If they did, they would have been competing for a three-peat, would have been insane in my opinion. So I'm glad that they weren't in the playoffs, but also they just proved the committee's theory of not putting Florida State into the playoffs because Georgia absolutely dominated against them.
It was a real nail-biter if you ask me.
Yeah, for sure. But what would you think if Georgia was selected to be in the playoffs? What would have happened?
Let's be completely honest with ourselves here. Georgia's better than Washington. Georgia was better than Texas. Georgia was better than Bama. They lost to Bama, and I think it was a fluke. I think it was a very poorly played game by Georgia. But they lost that game, and that's why they didn't get in. It stinks for them, but it's how it goes when you have to only select 4 teams. But I think this does make a very good case for the 12-game or for the 12-team playoff, just because of how many good teams there are out there. And I think that if Georgia did make it in, it would end up being them and Michigan competing for the national championship. I think that would be a competitive game. I think Michigan was the only team in the country that could compete with Georgia on a consistent basis. So the committee did make the right decision for what they could do, but it does kind of hurt my heart for the Georgia players how well they played this season.
I completely agree with everything you said. The one thing I really do want to add, though, is the score was obviously really bad, but that also shows how bought in that Georgia team was. The commentators talked about it throughout the entire game. Georgia was just so bought in, so many guys came back, and so many guys didn't opt out. Once Georgia wasn't in the college football playoff, I would have expected a lot of people to opt out the way the Florida State players did. And Florida State was all injured. Florida State had everybody opting out. Georgia was all bought in. Mm-hmm. And seeing a team so bought in, so willing to play for each other and win, that would have been a great team to see in the college football playoff and maybe even defeat Michigan.
And that right there is culture. They all stayed to play. That's Alabama, that's Georgia, that's the SEC. And that's why the SEC has been so good in the college football playoffs. Mm-hmm.
I agree. I think it comes down to that. And we'll see what happens when it's the 12-team playoff next season. But to finish up, we have to talk about the national championship between Michigan and Washington. That was just an exciting game also. I said it in a previous show that I thought Michigan was going to take it all the way, which they did. They were a hungry team. They had everything going against them besides each other. They just believed in one in each other, and they were able to dominate in that game. So what were your takeaways from the national championship?
Michigan took away Washington's biggest strength. Washington needs their vertical game. They need their passing game. Michigan has very good corners. Michigan was able to shut down the corners. They were able to put pressure on Michael Penix and make him make mistakes. And the second Michael Penix was making mistakes, you knew the game was over. But you look at the other side and you see the two-headed monster that Michigan had all season that we talked about so many times when we talked about Big Ten football. Blake Corum cemented his name in history for Michigan. And Donovan Edwards, he helped out so much too with 2 40-plus yard touchdowns. He did a great job. And the way you were talking earlier about J.J. McCarthy doing well and not focusing on the things around him to help him win, he got carried in this national championship. And I think J.J. McCarthy has bust written all over him when it comes to the future.
Yeah, so J.J. obviously didn't have to do as much in this game. He did kind of rely on his running backs. But even so, Washington never had to face a defense like Michigan, a real Big Ten defense, and it showed in this game by the final score. So I'm not surprised Michigan won it all, and I am happy for them, and I'm happy that the Big Ten finally got a national championship.
It's definitely exciting for the Big Ten and the future of Big Ten football. But for right now, that's a wrap of the 2023-2024 college football season. But as always, we will be ready for all that comes in the 2024-2025 season. For Joey David and Jackson Tortone, I'm Gianna Cutaia. Thank you for watching and have a great night.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into this edition of Penn State Sports Night.
For more content like this, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like, and follow our socials down below.
And as always, we are
Penn State Sports Night.